What if, uh, what if the ultimate cure for chronic classroom absenteeism wasn't strict rules?
Right. Or, better grading curves.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Or even more compelling lectures. What if the definitive solution to keeping students engaged was literally just handing them the mechanics of a video game?
Which, I mean, if you're listening to this and rolling your eyes at the idea of an educational game, we honestly do not blame you.
No, not at all. We all remember playing those like clunky, pixelated math games in the 90s.
Oh, yeah, the ones that were essentially just digital flashcards.
Well, just flashcards disguised with a few, flashy sound effects.
Yeah.
But today, we are looking at an educational framework that completely shatters that old mold.
Because that traditional divide between the classroom and the screen is really how most educational systems were historically built.
Yeah, you have a desk where you do pure work.
And you have a couch where you experience pure entertainment. But the modern landscape of human performance and skill acquisition proves that separating those two environments is actually a massive missed opportunity.
A huge one.
Because knowledge is fundamentally most valuable when it's applied. And, we are constantly searching for ways to engage a demographic that is just deeply hungry for interactivity.
Which brings us to our mission for today's deep dive. We are so thrilled you could join us because we're exploring a highly influential 2007 research paper.
Right, by Julian Alvarez, Jean-Pierre Dussel, and Gilles Methel.
Yeah, and we are looking at the collision of two massive educational frameworks here, problem-based learning and serious games. Our goal is to figure out if these two methods merely share a few surface-level traits, or if combining them creates a specific mechanism that completely supercharges how you learn.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we mash these two frameworks together, we need to clearly define our ingredients. Let's start with problem-based learning, or PBL. I know it happens in a classroom, but what are the actual mechanics of it?
So, problem-based learning is a highly active instructional strategy. The paper references experts like James Rem to define it. In a traditional classroom, a teacher gives you the information first, right? And then you take a test to prove you memorized it.
The classic model, yeah.
Right. But problem-based learning flips that entirely. Students are immediately confronted with what the researchers call ill-structured problems.
Structure problems.
Yeah, problems that are deeply contextualized in real professional practice. So they have to strive to find meaningful solutions completely by themselves.
Usually in a small group, right?
Yes, usually within a small group, following preset stages, and they're guided by a tutor.
Okay, I really want to focus on that phrase you used, ill-structured problems.
Right.
Give me an example of what makes a problem ill-structured.
Well, think of it this way. A well-structured problem is a standard math worksheet.
Right.
You are given an equation, you apply a specific formula, and the answer is always 4. There is zero ambiguity.
It's neat and tidy?
Exactly. An ill-structured problem is a doctor walking into an exam room to diagnose a patient who has, 5 conflicting symptoms.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Right. The doctor has to investigate, make assumptions, test those assumptions, and navigate a really messy reality. PBL puts students in that messy reality from day one. You aren't just memorizing facts, you're applying them to a chaotic scenario.
That sounds incredibly effective for, a small group of students.
Right.
But obviously you run into a massive scalability issue there.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you cannot hire 1 million human tutors to run complex, ill-structured role plays for every single student in the country.
You really can't. Which brings us to the technological solution and our second ingredient today, serious games.
Right.
The paper relies on a definition from Mike Zaida. He describes a serious game as a mental contest played with a computer in accordance with specific rules.
Okay, so it's a computer game, but for what?
It uses entertainment to further government training, corporate education, health, public policy, or strategic communication objectives.
So taking the fun parts and using them for work.
Exactly. Serious games take the 3 pillars of a traditional video game.
Which the researchers define as story, art, and software.
Right. Yes. They take story, art, and software and aim them at a very specific didactic or educational goal.
But this is where I think a lot of people, myself included, get kind of skeptical.
Sure.
Whenever I hear about an educational video game, I kind of assume it's just tricking the player. It's essentially hiding vegetables in the pasta sauce for kids.
That's a great way to put it.
You are playing a fun platformer game, jumping around, and suddenly the game pauses, and it forces you to solve an algebra equation before you can jump over the pit.
Right.
It feels like an ad break for learning. So my question is, does the game actually change the learning itself, or is it just flashy dressing?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the researchers, alongside experts like Andre Trico, explicitly warn against that exact approach.
Really? They say not to do that.
Yes, they argue that you cannot simply have a pedagogical scenario running parallel to the video game.
Ah, so no ad breaks.
Exactly. If you do that, the player will just blindly click through the learning segment to get back to the fun segment.
Oh, absolutely. I would just guess the math answer until I could keep playing.
Exactly. The serious part entirely fails. It needs to be completely coherent.
It needs to be integrated. So instead of putting a racing stripe on a tractor to make it look fast, it needs to be more like a flight simulator.
A flight simulator, yes.
When a pilot trains in a flight simulator, they aren't playing a fun flying game and occasionally stopping to answer an aerodynamics quiz.
Right.
Controlling the aerodynamics is the game. The learning and the game mechanics are the exact same thing.
That is a perfect mechanical metaphor. The human performance engineering team has to work intimately with the game design team to ensure that coherence.
But building that level of integration requires a very specific foundation, doesn't it?
It does, which leads to the most surprising finding in the paper. When the researchers looked at how to bridge the gap between solving a messy problem in a classroom and navigating a digital world, they found a common ancestor.
And it wasn't early computer science.
No, it wasn't. It was the theater.
Okay, the paper mentions something about the theater here, which honestly threw me off when I read it. What does a high-tech video game have to do with putting on a stage play?
It comes down to how we simulate reality. The researcher Benoit Rosson notes that designing a problem-based learning scenario relies heavily on theatrical elements.
Like acting.
Sort of. He literally says that creating a PBL is trying to find the obstacle for each person and creating the adequate setting in situation.
So you're essentially building a stage, casting the student as the lead actor, and throwing a conflict their way.
Exactly. And the paper calls that a cognitive conflict.
Cognitive conflict. It's the friction that creates motivation, right?
Yes. It's the obstacle that makes the learning suddenly necessary, because you literally need the knowledge to overcome the hurdle in front of you.
To understand the mechanism, we have to look at the philosophy behind it. Because the paper connects these simulations to Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed and Augusto Boll's Theater of the Oppressed.
Right, which are huge concepts.
Yeah. Freire argued that knowledge is not something a teacher simply transmits into an empty vessel. Knowledge is constructed by the student through dialogue, recognizing they already hold the key to their own understanding.
And then Boll took Freire's philosophy and applied it to the theater.
But how did Boll do that? I mean, stage plays are usually incredibly passive. You sit in the dark and watch actors talk.
That's the genius of it. Boll created interactive plays.
Interactive play.
Yeah. He would stage a scene showing an oppressive or difficult situation, but then he would allow the audience to literally yell, "Stop!" Step up onto the stage, take the place of the actors, and try to change the outcome of the story themselves.
Oh, wow. So they were testing solutions in real time.
Yes, they were taking agency.
Which is literally the exact definition of a video game. You are an active participant stepping into the world, trying to change the outcome of the narrative. You aren't watching the hero, you are the hero.
Exactly. The paper includes a remarkable quote from Monique Clavel-Levesque regarding this dynamic. She says the ludic experiment,
Meaning the playful experiment.
yes, the playful experiment is a small-scale model. It allows us to bypass lived, real-world consequences while still experiencing the authentic emotions and impulses of the situation.
That's profound.
It is. She summarizes it beautifully by saying, the theater helps us understand the world, and the circus helps us control it.
The circus being the act of playing, the physical manipulation of the game. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, and I have to push back a little on this premise.
Go for it.
If problem-based learning is essentially interactive theater without the software, does adding the software inherently make it a better learning tool? Or is it just a more modern, expensive way to do the exact same thing?
That's a great question. Adding software fundamentally changes the scale and the safety of the learning environment.
The scale and the safety.
Yes, think about it. In a physical classroom, a human tutor can only run a complex medical role play or a business negotiation so many times before logistics get in the way.
Right, scheduling, space, energy.
Exactly. Software allows for infinitely repeatable simulations. It creates an environment where the learner has true autonomous agency to test assumptions, make catastrophic mistakes, and try again without any real-world damage.
So it takes Bowles' interactive theater and just scales it infinitely.
Exactly. And once you recognize this shared theatrical DNA, the paper points out that the other parallels between problem-based learning and serious games start piling up rapidly.
Yeah, the researchers identified 6 hidden similarities, dividing them into 3 usage traits and 3 common struggles. Let's hit the usage traits first.
Sure. The 3 usage traits show how mechanically similar they are in practice. First, both rely on an iterative approach.
Meaning you try something, you receive feedback, you adjust, and you try again.
Right. Second, both rely on a ludic or playful aspect to keep the learner motivated through that repetition.
You need the playfulness so they don't give up.
Exactly. And third, both absolutely require the presence of a mediator or a tutor to guide the reflection process.
That third point is crucial, I think. Even in a computer game, the software itself acts as a mediator, delivering feedback. Or a human teacher frames the gameplay before and after the session.
Yeah, you need that framing. But it is the 3 shared struggles that really clarify their connection.
The struggles, right. Both PBL and serious games struggle to prove their added value to traditional educational institutions.
Yes, because they look so different from normal school.
Exactly. They both exist to answer a modern generation's deep eagerness for interactivity. And, perhaps most difficult, they both struggle to find adapted systems of valuation.
Valuation is a massive hurdle.
Like grading.
Yeah, how do you put a traditional letter grade on a student navigating a complex, ill-structured simulation? You cannot give a multiple-choice test to someone who just spent 3 hours in a flight simulator.
Right, their ability to land the plane is the test.
Exactly.
It is like they are 2 inventors from completely different centuries trying to solve the exact same puzzle.
That's a great analogy.
How do we keep an audience fundamentally engaged rather than passively absorbing information?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it explains a fascinating historical dynamic. Serious games are a relatively new phenomenon.
Right. Video games haven't been around that long.
The paper points out that Ben Sawyer, co-director of the Serious Games Initiative, views the military game America's Army from 2002 as the first truly significant serious game.
2002, so very recent in the grand scheme of education.
Very recent. And because they are so new, they desperately needed legitimacy. They needed the established, rigorously tested pedagogical foundation of problem-based learning to prove to corporate boards and school districts that they were more than just trivial toys.
They needed PBL to vouch for them.
Exactly. They needed that academic cosign.
But the researchers realized that this relationship shouldn't just be one way. If serious games could borrow legitimacy from PBL, then PBL could borrow the incredible engagement and technological scale of serious games.
Right. A mutual exchange.
But they needed to prove these 2 methods could mutually benefit each other in reality, not just in academic theory.
And to prove that, they designed a meticulous, double-layered experiment to test the reciprocity between the 2 frameworks.
Okay, set the scene for us. Where did this happen?
The setting was the IUT Sercom in Tarbes, France. They took 30 multimedia students who were around 20 years old.
So university students.
Yeah. These students had theoretical knowledge of project management and software like Flash and Photoshop, but they had never actually built a serious game from scratch.
So layer 1 of the experiment is the problem-based learning layer. The researchers present these university students with a massive, ill-structured problem.
A huge problem.
They're given exactly 1 month to transform an existing, purely entertaining video game into a serious game. The teacher acts as their tutor, guiding them through the stages. And the pedagogic aim for these 20-year-olds is to deeply internalize multimedia creation skills under a strict deadline.
Right. They were allowed to modify the game, either by changing the art and sound assets or by entirely changing the gameplay rules.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the true genius of the experiment is layer 2, the serious game layer.
This is where it gets crazy.
It is. The game these university students were building wasn't just a theoretical exercise, it had a very specific target audience. It was designed for secondary school pupils.
High schoolers.
Yeah, high schoolers who were about to graduate and had to make imminent decisions about their future studies.
And the goal of the game they were building was to teach these high schoolers about professional trades that are often completely unknown or fuzzy to teenagers. Let's make this concrete.
Sure.
If I am one of these 20-year-old multimedia students, I might take a basic resource management game, and instead of mining gold to build a castle, I change the rules and the art, so the player has to manage a project budget, deal with crashing software, and hit a client deadline.
Yes, you are building a simulation that shows a 17-year-old what a multimedia project manager actually does all day.
That is exactly the kind of integration they were aiming for. The learning is the mechanic itself. But wait, putting 20-year-olds in charge of designing a curriculum for high schoolers using software, they're just barely learning
It
themselves.
sounds chaotic.
It sounds like a recipe for a total meltdown. Does that double pressure cause them to freeze up and panic, or does it force them to step up?
It forces them to step up because it brilliantly weaponizes the concept of cognitive conflict at two entirely different age levels simultaneously.
Explain that. How does it weaponize it?
Well, for the university students, the cognitive conflict is incredibly high stakes. They're thinking, can I master this complex software well enough and fast enough to turn a toy into a functional teaching tool for someone else?
Oh man, the pressure.
Right. They have to learn the multimedia skills, which is the PBL goal, because they immediately have to turn around and apply it to an end user. In the second layer, the university students essentially become the tutors for the high schoolers.
It creates a flawless feedback loop. The university students are learning by doing, and the high school students are learning by playing. So the million-dollar question: did this ambitious two-layered inception actually work in practice?
It was a massive, undeniable success.
Real?
Yes. On a purely logistical level, all 30 students, who are divided into 6 groups, delivered their components perfectly on time.
Wow. In 1 month.
In 1 month, they successfully created specifications, multimedia pay stubs, questionnaires, journals, and delivered final presentations within that strict deadline.
But the data point that absolutely blew my mind was the behavioral shift. So what does this all mean for the engagement issue we talked about at the top of the show?
This is the best part.
The researchers noted that teachers of other traditional classes had complained about a significantly high rate of absenteeism among these specific multimedia students. They were prone to skipping class.
Right, they were disengaged.
But for this specific PBL and Serious Game project, the absenteeism rate was 0. Not a single student skipped.
0. That is the ultimate power of the cognitive conflict, when the problem has real-world stakes.
When it's essentially a theatrical performance they have to pull off for a real audience of teenagers.
Exactly. The intrinsic motivation skyrockets. The engagement problem wasn't just mitigated, it was entirely solved.
That's incredible. And what about the second layer? Did the Serious Games actually achieve their didactic goal with the high schoolers?
They did. The secondary school teachers were thrilled with the initiative. They saw a highly concrete, valuable link between the games the university students created and their own professional discovery programs for the teens.
But the definitive proof of reciprocity, the moment that proved these two frameworks worked perfectly in tandem, occurred after the high schoolers finished playing the games.
Yeah, they didn't just learn about the abstract trades, did they?
No. A group of the younger secondary pupils were so captivated by the digital experience that they ended up seeking out the older university students to ask them specifically about their studies in multimedia.
Think about that. The game designed to introduce a new trade effectively introduced the high schoolers to the trade of multimedia creation itself.
The medium literally became the message.
It did.
The university students who started out just trying to learn how to manipulate Photoshop ended up acting as passionate ambassadors for their entire field of study just because the serious game they built was so flawlessly executed.
This raises an important question about how we fundamentally define the act of learning. The researchers conclude their paper by bringing in a vital perspective from Gilles Bruguère's book, To Play, to Learn.
What does he argue?
He argues that our entire society needs to shift its viewpoint. Learning is not just sitting passively at a desk attempting to memorize isolated facts.
Right.
Bruguère states that learning becomes a continuous activity, basically social, that accompanies in a conscious way or not a number of our behaviors.
If learning is a continuous social activity, then games shouldn't be dismissed as a distraction from academics.
No, absolutely not.
They should be rigorously analyzed and utilized as a profound space for training.
The TARPS experiment empirically proved that problem-based learning and serious games are perfectly adjusted to mutually reinforce one another.
They need each other.
Yeah, by merging the rigorous pedagogical scenarios of PBL with the interactive, infinitely scalable mechanics of serious games, you register the student in what the paper calls a virtuous circle of training.
A virtuous circle where engagement drives deep learning, which in turn drives even more engagement.
Exactly.
We have covered a tremendous amount of ground today. We have traced the shared DNA of problem-based learning and serious games.
We've uncovered their somewhat unexpected roots in the interactive theater of Augusto Boll.
Yeah, and the empowering philosophy that knowledge must be constructed through agency, not just passively transmitted.
And we have seen the empirical proof of that theory in action. We've seen how merging these two educational philosophies creates a powerhouse of engagement that can literally cure classroom absenteeism.
But remember the key caveat. Dressing up knowledge in a game only works if the pedagogy and the play are seamlessly mechanically coherent.
Right. You cannot just pause the fun for an ad break of learning. The learning has to be the core mechanic of the fun itself.
It fundamentally shifts how you look at the structure of a classroom and, frankly, how you look at the mechanics of any video game. Which brings us to a final, slightly provocative thought we want to leave you with today.
We have talked about how learning is fundamentally a continuous social activity that happens whether we are conscious of it or not.
And we have talked about how interactive games are just small-scale models to help us understand and control our reality.
So as you go about the rest of your day, take a close look at the screen in your pocket.
What purely entertaining activities or daily apps are secretly training you right now? What digital cognitive conflicts are they placing in front of you? And what exactly are they teaching you to do without you even realizing it? Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. We will catch you next time.